It's Friday afternoon, March 20th, 2026, and the weekend rush is just beginning to peak. A shopper at a Loblaw grocery store stands at the checkout with a plastic basket full of weeks' worth of perishables. They have milk, a carton of eggs, and a rotisserie chicken still radiating heat through its plastic container. They reach out and tap their credit card against the terminal, expecting the usual frictionless beep of a successful transaction. Instead, every single register in the entire building simultaneously emits a flat, grating, digital error tone. The cashier pauses, looks at the screen, and tries the card again, then a third time, before sighing and reaching for the power cable. They restart the machine, watching the loading bar crawl across the display while the line behind the shopper begins to grow restless. It doesn't work. The terminal remains stubbornly disconnected from the invisible network that governs modern life. Across the store, the exact same scene is playing out at 30 different checkout stations, from the self-serve kiosks to the pharmacy counter. Loblaw is a multi-billion-dollar retail giant, a logistical empire that has mastered the complex art of moving food across an entire continent. But right now, the company is completely paralyzed because it can no longer complete a simple $5 transaction at the register. This isn't an isolated incident in a single neighborhood. It is the beginning of a systemic collapse of the digital checkout infrastructure. Reports begin to surface on social media that some stores across the national chain are experiencing a sudden payment systems outage. Shoppers are forced to simply walk away, leaving rows of full, abandoned carts to clutter the fluorescent-lit aisles. Within the hour, store managers are forced to pivot to the primitive, taping handwritten cardboard, cash-only signs over high-tech screens. To the frustrated people standing in the aisles, it feels like a coordinated cyber attack on the national food supply or a state-sponsored strike. But the truth behind the sudden gridlock is much more mundane than a shadow war between nation-states or elite hacker collectives. The company will eventually post a brief notice on their official channels saying the issue is now resolved, without further explanation. But for a few critical hours, the digital architecture that we rely on for our basic survival simply went dark without warning. This is the story of the dead register and the fragile, invisible handshakes that keep a modern city from grinding to a total halt. The Loblaw failure is just one flickering node in a much larger, increasingly unstable web of digital dependencies. Across the globe, the frictionless digital grid is showing signs of systemic rot that no software patch seems to be able to fully fix. In Moscow and St. Petersburg, the high-tech subway turnstiles suddenly freeze mid-commute, trapping thousands of people in the tunnels. Major banking apps report a major outage, and what used to be efficient metro payment zones quickly become impassable human bottlenecks. At the same time in San Francisco, City Hall meeting rooms are filled with local officials looking for answers to their own infrastructure crisis. The Board of Supervisors formally blast PG&E, calling for a high-level inquiry into the public utility system after repeated December outages. They are investigating a recurring pattern of operational paralysis that has left the city's power grid flickering and unreliable for months. Even the most basic civic functions are being pulled into this digital vacuum as we phase out physical alternatives in favor of the cloud. By February, a sophisticated cyber attack paralyzes local government payment systems for days, preventing residents from paying their bills. Citizens find themselves staring at empty government payment portal screens, unable to settle property taxes or pay for basic city services. We have reached a point where every single transaction requires a silent software handshake to occur in the background of our lives. A request is sent to a distant data center, processed through miles of physical wiring, and verified by a server in a room no one ever sees. It is a complex choreography of data packets that happens in milliseconds, a miracle of engineering that we have come to take for granted. But as these technical failures in payment processing systems mount, the terrifying fragility of the digital grid becomes impossible to ignore. We have collectively traded physical backups in manual systems for a systemic vulnerability in digital payment architecture that has no plan B. When the digital checkout infrastructure goes dark, the physical world around us suddenly has no manual override to keep the gears turning. There is no cash on hand in the registers, no physical ledgers to record the debt, and no way for the cashier to move the line forward. To understand why a multi-billion-dollar grocery store can't sell a simple loaf of bread, you have to look inside the rooms where these handshakes fail. While the public waits for news of a sophisticated cyber warfare campaign or a global virus, the investigation leads to a much smaller room. It leads to a nondescript government building in Pierre, South Dakota, on the morning of October 31st, 2025. A statewide two-day IT outage begins, crippling everything from the government's internal billing to the law enforcement databases. At first, the speculation is predictable and filled with the dread of modern conflict, a cyber attack by a foreign power testing the grid. But then, weeks later, the official IT outage report is quietly released to the public, and the terrifying reality is revealed. According to the report from State Scoop, the cause of the state's total operational paralysis wasn't a malicious line of code from a hacker. It was a series of mislabeled wires inside a single server rack in a single data center in the middle of the state. A technician had stepped into the room to perform routine maintenance and misidentified the physical wiring that kept the state online. One handheld label maker, one wrong tag, and one small physical mistake were enough to trigger a total systemic collapse for 48 hours. This is the hidden reality of what we call the digital payment grid. It is not an ethereal cloud, but a collection of vulnerable physical things. We imagine the threat to our way of life as a shadowy hacker collective working in a dark room halfway across the world. But the systemic vulnerability is often just a person in a fluorescent-lit server room holding a roll of tape and a manual. The Loblaw outage followed this same trajectory of a grand systemic failure caused by a small, localized technical oversight. A technical failure in their payment processing systems left an entire national chain unable to accept money on one of the busiest days of the week. The company will eventually say the issue is now resolved, but they will never show the public the physical labor required to fix it. They won't show the technicians standing over the rack, sweat on their brow, trying to find the one cable that isn't where it's supposed to be. The digital checkout infrastructure isn't a magical self-healing system. It is a physical room where human error can stop an entire economy. It is a system that has been optimized for efficiency and speed, but it has completely sacrificed the resilience of the old physical world. When a single mislabeled port can prevent 1 million people from buying milk, the definition of progress becomes a matter of perspective. The corporate response to these failures is always a study in careful, strategic containment designed to protect the stock price. Loblaw releases a brief, clinical statement claiming only some stores saw a payment systems outage on that chaotic Friday afternoon. By the time they post the words, "Issue now resolved," to their social media feeds, the operational paralysis has already left its mark. In San Francisco, where the grid failures have become a political flashpoint, the reaction from the public is significantly less conciliatory. The Board of Supervisors continues to blast PG&E, demanding an inquiry into why a modern American city feels like a developing nation. They are looking for a concrete reason why the digital grid keeps flickering into technical failure at the most inconvenient possible moments. It is a pattern of systemic vulnerability that spans continents and ignores the boundaries of wealth, geography, and political ideology. In Russia, the major outage that hit banking apps and metro payment zones simultaneously revealed the same underlying structural weakness. Commuters who haven't seen a physical paper ticket in years found themselves trapped behind frozen glass gates, unable to reach their jobs. Back at the grocery counters in the West, the high-tech digital checkout infrastructure stayed dark for hours, refusing to acknowledge any card. The frictionless experience was abruptly replaced by a low-tech, desperate relic of the pre-digital age that the industry tried to kill. Store managers scrambled to find felt-tip markers and scraps of discarded cardboard from the shipping area in the back of the store. Cash only was scrawled in jagged, hurried letters and taped over the glossy, unresponsive screens of the self-checkout kiosks. It was a physical admission that the frictionless world we have built has no manual override and no way to handle a simple technical glitch. In local government offices across the country, the payment departments were just as silent and just as useless during the February attack. The cyber attack had already left the online portals empty and unresponsive, leaving citizens in a state of financial limbo. Residents trying to pay their water or electricity bills were met with nothing but error logs, spinning wheels, and unverified pings. The political and regulatory backlash to these events is immediate and loud, But the fundamental damage to public trust is already done. The public trust in the reliability of the digital transaction infrastructure begins to slowly but surely erode with every new outage. Shoppers are starting to carry physical bills in their wallets again, just in case a technician in a distant state mislabels another wire. The corporate notifications eventually clear from our phones, and the news cycle moves on to the next crisis or the next scandal. Loblaw assures the public that the issue is now resolved and that systems are back to their peak, frictionless operational status. South Dakota IT officials fix their mislabeled wires, the servers are rebooted, and the Russian metro gates finally swing open for the commuters. But the physical world does not reboot in milliseconds the way a server does. It leaves behind a residue of waste and frustration. Inside a Loblaw store on a Friday evening after the power comes back on, the aisles are completely, unnervingly silent. Dozens of full shopping carts sit exactly where the customers abandoned them when the registers died, like ghosts of a dead economy. The high-tech registers are still masked by jagged pieces of cardboard, even though the screens behind them are finally glowing again. A single monitor flickers in the dark at the end of an aisle, illuminating a system offline prompt in the middle of the empty store. Underneath it, left behind in a wire basket by a shopper who couldn't wait any longer, a rotisserie chicken is slowly cooling. The digital grid is reconnected, the handshakes are being exchanged once more, and the servers are finally verifying every ping. But the food is just sitting there in the dark, a physical consequence of a digital ghost that no one knows how to fix. We have built a world that can move a mountain of goods with a single click, but we can't buy a snack if a wire loses its tag. As the registers hum back to life, the cooling chicken remains as a quiet monument to the fragility of our frictionless age. The issue is resolved, the system is back online, but the trust in the invisible hand remains broken. Next time the screens go dark, the shoppers won't wait for the reboot. They'll just leave the carts where they stand, and the rotisserie chickens will keep cooling under the flicker of the unverified pings.